Okay, I'm going to tell you a good story. Last year, for Eski's birthday, they did a birthday for him at the Peterson Museum. And they invited a few people to be part of a group honoring him. There was about 6 or 7 of us. And I was sitting right next to Ed. And everybody's saying their little thing about him. And then all of a sudden, Eski looks over at me and he says, "You know something?" He says, "Do you remember when you used to be an usher at that theater?" And I'm thinking, this goes back to, I was probably 14 years old, maybe 15. And there was a theater on Adams Boulevard, Adams and Crenshaw Boulevard, called the Bard's Theater. And I would work there as an usher. And Eski came in a couple times, and I would take him to his seat, usher him to his seat in the movie house. And he said to me, he said, "You know, I remember." And he brought that thing up and told me. And I told him, I said, "You got a hell of a memory," because as he said it, and I remembered, yeah, I did work at the Bard's Theater. And I know I was really young, 14, 15, maybe 16 years old as an usher. And I ushered him to his seat a couple of times. He and I were 10 years apart. He's 10 years older than me. Now, his life is a pretty open book. He's not a secret person. He's very good with people. He knows his friends, and he knows the people that are just hanger-oners that really aren't friends, they're just acquaintances, but he knows his friends. And he and I have been friends for a lot of years. I can remember back when I was a young guy past the Bard's Theater deal, and I used to ride my bike, and when he was living at home with his parents, he had a machine in the garage. And in those days, garages didn't open to the street, they opened to an alley. And I used to ride my bike back and forth across the alley, looking in at his little garage, wondering what he was doing. And I was always afraid to stop and go in and talk to him, because he might run me out and I wouldn't be able to do that anymore. So I'd just ride my bike up back and forth in the alley, looking in his garage to see what he was working on. But I had no idea what he was doing. 59, 58, right in there, I had a repair shop that used to be Frank Barron's on Venice and Highland. And Eski would come to see me every once in a while, and it had a little driveway. So he'd pull up on the driveway and his car would be like this. He'd be in a Cadillac. And he'd get out of the car and oranges and apples would fall out and roll down the driveway. And he would in fact, Sylvia has a picture of one of his cars that finally got to the point that he had to park it because there was no room for him to sit. He doesn't throw anything away. And I'll tell you a very cute story. One time when he was still working full time, I needed to go and see him. And this is back probably in the early 60s when I first opened my first engine shop. And I went to the front desk, and Norris Baronian was working for him, who later was Baronian Cams, Norris Cams. But anyway, they all knew me, and I knew everybody there. And I said, I came in to see Ed. Okay. And they took me to his office. And they sat me down in this chair behind his desk, on the front side of his desk. And I'm sitting in the chair waiting for Eski to show up. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there, and I look up like I'm looking at you, and I see this little smoke ring go up in the eye. And I stood up and I looked. It was Ed. He was sitting at the desk, but he's got so much junk piled on his desk, I couldn't see him. And all of a sudden, he was smoking a cigar, and the cigar smoke went up, and I realized there's somebody there. And I get up and looked, and there he is. And I says, "How long you been here?" He says, "I've been here a long time. How long you been here?" I said, "Well, I've been sitting here for 5 or 10 minutes waiting for you to come in here." "I've been here all the time." And I said, "Well, he couldn't see you." And he was in everything, in the camshafts and lifters and push rods and valve springs. And back in the day, he was the go-to guy if you for camshafts or whatever. And he had his brother was one of his cam designers, They had him locked in a room all the time while he was doing all this designing. You know, the thing is this, that he knew what needed to get done, and he got the right people to help him do it. And he didn't nickel and dime stuff. He did it right. He was good for the sport, and the sport was good for him. I think it was a two-way street. He wasn't a guy that sold cams and took the profit and ran. You know, he took care of everybody. He took care of his customers, and now he's the first one with real race T-shirts. He was the guy. His cams were good, his springs were good, all this stuff was good. He did good PR work. He took care of his people, and the good Lord's taking care of him, letting him live so long. I would say Essie earned his with his performance and his promotions. And Vic did it flat racing and making racing equipment for the flatheads.
What a character. I go out and see his son, Richard and Ron, and of course had to catch up with Ed. Well, Ed eats at the same hamburger place he's ate for the last 100 years. And so we had to go down there. And what is so fascinating about Ed, now last time I saw Ed, he was probably, I don't know, 92 or 93. And the first thing Ed wants to know is, what are you doing? And he wants to know, what are you doing on this? And then he'd say, you know, back in '38 on this engine, we found, I mean, Ed's mind is just, you can see why he was so successful, because he never stopped thinking and never stopped inquiring. And I mean, I can't tell you, one of the fun things about Ed is he hated trash. And so he'd get an old car and he'd start picking stuff up off the sidewalk and putting it in the car. And I go to Rich, I said, it looks like the trash is up covering everything. Oh, he says, oh, yeah, I got 10 more cars in the back that Ed did spend. I go, really? And so I got there another time, and he had part of his hamburger, and he was feeding the pigeons. And when he got done, he took this wrapper, went over and threw it in his new trash bin at the car. And Ed obviously came through the Depression, and nothing was wasted. Everything was saved and reused, and just how Ed carries himself in that manner is amazing. I mean, not many people at his age are still interested in everything else. You know, if it's auto-related or an engine or something, he wants to know about it. And just a super nice, never had an opinion if somebody was bad or not right or this or that, just a wonderful guy. And of course, the same thing flowed through to Richard and Ron, both great guys. And but Ed, one off. I can't believe he's still here, but it's wonderful he is.
I had an absolute joy at PRI a couple of years ago. We used to go sneak around and miss breakfast lines, go to the subway that was back behind some of the hotels. And I go into the subway one morning, and it's Dave Henniger and myself. We get up there and we sit down, and who sits down in the booth next to us but Ed Iskenderian. Ed Iskenderian had a presentation he was going to give at 10:30 that day, and it's about 8:30 in the morning. He proceeds, finds out we had comp cam shirts on, you know, and then proceeds to go over his presentation for over an hour, talking about everything that's going on in the engine, how the intake stroke really works, what's going on overlap, about wave tuning. You know, I am listening to a guy who's probably at the time about 97, 98 years old, who never had the modeling and the ability to test that we have today. And yet he's going through all the fundamentals of how the camshaft is the conductor of the entire engine airflow package. And the amazing ability he had, it was like watching the pinball wizard, because when we talk about deflection, we can measure deflection. When we talk about port velocities, if we can't measure it, we can model it really, really close. So we have all of these tools today to try to understand what's going on. Ed just saw it. That ability to look inside an engine set Ed apart from his entire generation, and probably set the whole performance aftermarket valve train going. You know, clearly Ed Winfield was amazing. You had people that were doing great camshafts before, but really they were just adding some duration to camshafts, adding some lift and moving them around. Ed Iskenderian took that science, made that into a science and an art form by figuring out what's going inside the engine. Why does the intake need to close later? Why does the exhaust need to open earlier? What is happening under overlap? All of this stuff was really ignored before Ed, at least to what we can see, that Ed set that and made that to go. A lot of people would say, you know, I was brought up under Harvey Crane. I spent my time going down to Daytona Beach, Spruce Creek Drive, going over to Harvey's and learning from Harvey. Harvey Crane was the artist of cam lobes, but he just designed a cam lobe that was the most beautiful camshaft lobe he could for that lift and duration. The difference between Harvey, who is as good of a dynamic lobe designer as you could ever imagine, trying to get a lobe that would be stable to a certain RPM at these specs. Ed, in my mind, was even better for our industry because he could figure out what size it needs to be. Together, when Harvey was able to see what Ed had optimized the specs and to design a better lobe, that's how Harvey wound up taking a lot of customers from Ed. But make no doubt about it that Ed had the fundamental understanding. He was probably 30, 40 years above anybody in the field at understanding, why do we want to add duration? Why do we want to add lift? What are we actually doing in the engine when we change cam specs? And for that reason, first ballot Hall of Famer.